Hey, what's going on, guys? Happy holidays, and welcome back to another episode of Filzys Workbench Journal. In case you're wondering, I just got out of work about 15-20 minutes ago, so I apologize for the look today. Anyway, so I think where I last left off, I was gluing in the cockpit and the fuselage on the AMK 148 scale Kfir C2 C7. Well, here's the progress I've made so far. I was worried that it was a tail sitter, so what I did was I added some scrap steel from my job as I drop them. Piece right here. I had plenty of scrap at the shop, so it saved me money on getting lead sinkers and stuff. Somebody pointed out, why don't you go buy them at the fish and tackle shop? Well, sometimes you can't. And in my case, I really don't feel like it. So, like I said, used a piece of this. I put it in the nose section here. I put two at the most, filled in with super glue, give it time to cure, and it worked pretty good. And once I got all that done, I moved on to the fuselage here. Now, the fuselage was pretty easy. It was slightly warped. I'm guessing probably because of the heat, or maybe it was sitting somewhere. I don't know. Right now, it could be because I'm right next to a gas heater. So I try to keep all my flammables to this side with good reason. Anyway, so I got the fuselage on, as you can tell here. There was a little bit of a step, but that was more of my fault. I'm not very good with glue. I'm rather ham-handed in my builds, so try to be careful as possible. It doesn't quite work. But it turned out better than I thought, because since it was a little warped, I glued sections at a time. I started at the tail right here. I used a couple clamps on the tail so it wouldn't pop out on me. Then I worked my way forward for about a good half hour to an hour, which made life a lot easier. There were some slight gaps in the nose, which is a good thing why I glues the front nose to the rest of the fuselage. And in case anybody wonders, there is a step under here. That's intentional. Don't worry about that. Just make sure the upper half is round. I glued everything. I did some seam filling. I realized I didn't really need any putty, so I went with this for a little bit, which works great for like small seams and stuff. This is Tamiya's liquid surface primer. Basically, it's a very well thin putty. As a matter of fact, here's the putty right here. So I did that after I got everything glued, let it sit, cure for a little while, put on the surface primer, and then I went to sanding it down with business. Now, since I was using a liquid surface primer, I used a finer grit. I don't buy sanding sticks from a local hobby shop, although I should, but I buy a lot of paints and models there. I got this from a beauty supply store. These are actually cheaper, about $1.50 per, depending on the size. This is a 220-320 grit. And the good part is these are color coded. I did my sanding, wet sand of course. Basically I keep a little bit of water so this way it doesn't clog up the sanding stick, and it also removes any excess putty or surface primer depending. Once I got it done, it was good to go. I also had to do some modifications since I'm building the C2 version. I had to remove the bump off of here, which is for the C7, no vent. And I also put the this here. I forgot what I would call it, but I put this part here instead of the other part for the C7, because the C2 doesn't carry a paved penny pod until they upgraded of the C7s, which is on here somewhere. Let's see. Well, I got a bunch of vents. Wrong sprue, no matter. But we'll get back into that in a little bit. So I did all that. I did my sanding, I did my filling, I did everything I had to do. Then I moved on to the wing here. I moved the bottom half and the upper half, as you can see here. I glued this in first. Now, I don't know on a real aircraft it's pronounced like this, but you see the heavy seams in there. What I may do the surface primer again to make it not as pronounced. I mean, most of it can be hid with a couple pylons on the fuselage, but we'll find out for sure. I'll do my research carefully. I'm still in the process of it. As for the upper wings, this is kind of interesting. They had clear parts for the lights here. Personally, I think this is more of a pet peeve of mine than anything else. You really don't need them. You can always paint them, but some companies like to do that. So I glued them in, put in red and green respectively for the formation lights, or location lights, even though I got to paint the wingtips here red and green. And then I glued the upper wings to the bottom wing. Now, I think I should have done some test sanding and test fitting before I glued them, because I had some gaps and I had a slight step in the underside of the wing. So I glued everything, put it aside, let it sit for a day for the glue to fully cure. And then I filled it in with my new favorite putty, Tamiya putty. This is actually the gray one. They also make a white one. For a while, I used to use Squadron Green putty, which is a great putty. But for some reason, this has become my favorite. It's much smoother, and it's got a very fine filler in it. Although I've heard some people say it might have a metallic material in there. I have yet to see it. So, but it worked great. Once again, I applied the putty with a putty knife. As you can see here, I gotta clean this off. And the other half here, I didn't go crazy with it. I should have put some masking tape on for a minimum, but it's the underside. I can always rescribe. So I did let it fully cure for a day or two, which is actually a good idea with putty because it does tend to shrink. Or if you want, you can always use super glue, which I'll explain further down the road. Let it shrink a little bit, sanded it down, did the same thing. Used the sanding sticks, wet sanded, finer grit as I went until everything finally blended together, which is what I wanted. And it did pretty good, but I think it shrank a little more. The putty shrank just a little bit more, so for good measure, I put some more surface primer on the underside of the wing. This way I can make everything smooth everything out, make sure everything's okay. And I just forgot. I'm sorry. Well, anyway, as for the glue I used to use 10X7R and Amber Pro Weld, which were great glues because they literally melted the plastic, so when you squeezed it, a little excess would come out. But I really can't find Amber Pro Weld anymore. I don't think they make it anymore. So I don't use it as much. I have a bottle of 10X7R, but I try to avoid using it because if you leave the cap off, it will evaporate in the bottle. So I use it only when necessary. However, my new favorite liquid cement is Tamiya's Extra Thin Cement. This actually works great, especially for the newer Tamiya kits. And I use this one. It's a little bit of a hot formula. Now, the reason why I say a little bit of a hot formula is because the 10X7R and Amber Pro Weld, I'm rather sloppy with it, but I've gotten better over the years. It feels rather cold when it hits skin, and you don't want that on your skin, because who knows what it's going to do. I wouldn't recommend doing it if you're going to put on some gloves. But I have switched to this, and it works a lot better. It doesn't work as the same effect as the 10X7R or the Pro Weld, but it's a little slower in the setting time. But it gave me plenty of time to set the wings best I could, and once they were dry, I glued them to the fuselage. Now, the wing itself the bottom wing was also warped. Once again, I blame the gas heater, or it could have sat on a shelf for a while. Who knows? Conditions from the weather, humidity, I don't know. But it really wasn't such a problem. I started back here. I let it set for a good half hour before I started gluing section by section on the wing as it went. Once I got to the front, I used a little bit of pressure, squeezed it down some, applied the cement as I went. I really didn't mess with anything. Unfortunately, I didn't have any clamps big enough to hold the front end of the bottom wing in place. But if I pushed down too hard, it would have set right into the fuselage, which is what you don't want to do. You want this as smooth and uniform as possible. So I was very careful with it. I also glued the landing gear. I shouldn't say the landing gear. The main gear interior was kind of unique because most do upper half, lower half, mold the sidewalls in. Not really with this one. Even though they mold the sidewalls with the bottom wings, they didn't mold all of it. The bays right here, as a matter of fact, they actually came in 3 pieces, like 1, 2, and 3. So I glued them and then I glued the wing. I also glued these in the process to make sure everything was firm and uniform as possible. So, and there's no gaps, there's no seams on the wings, as far as I know. If you could tell here, not a problem. I also did putty up here because there was a slight gap between the two. I'll sand that down as soon as possible. Now, I find this unnecessary, but I could understand why. They actually, if you noticed here, there's actually a spot where you have to put in a little strip. Well, this part's here. It's actually two pieces. You got this part here, and there's a smaller one on the sprue. I find it unnecessary, but I could understand why they did what they did, because this section is actually a little different as compared to this one. So nothing I can do about it. I just got to glue it in. I'll use a slower glue. I used the Model Master liquid cement. Now this isn't like the Maya thin cement, and it's actually not like the old Tester's tube glue. This is actually a different formula as compared to the old tube glue. The old tube glue was more like mozzarella, worked as similar to mozzarella. You just leave strings everywhere, and even then, it didn't sit right. So you just use this little blob of deformed plastic on the other side. This one, not so much. It works similar. It's not that thin. It's actually in between liquid cement and the tube glue, somewhere around that range. So it's neater and easier, but make sure you keep the tip cleared at all times. I don't recommend taking a lighter to it, but use a wire cleaner. I got a bunch of those from my job as a welder. So you use the finest one available, clear it out, works good. The other thing you got to pay attention to while you're building this, since this is C2, it's got the dogtooth leading edge. Be careful with these. They're sharp and they're prone to breaking. So the last thing you need is either be jabbed with one or break it off. And it's very difficult. Sometimes it's really difficult trying to recreate that dogtooth leading edge. As for the rest of the kit, though, everything's good on it. This is actually in a neutral position. They don't have the drop flaps like the Kinetic kit does, which actually works in my favor since I am going to be painting this in a two-tone gray scheme. The intakes, this is actually one side of the intake. And over here, these parts here, I did some research, and because they tell you white, but depending on what camouflage scheme you're using, they may tell you to use a different color. And I did my research, so the intakes are probably going to be either dark ghost gray or light ghost gray, and they're probably going to be on this side too. But I did do some test fitting, and it looks like it's going to be pretty easy to install. I hope. I mean, this kit's actually been a lot of fun with me, but you can tell here, do the test fit. I still got to do a little bit of clamps here and there. The gun ports here, they're actually still a little warped, but I figure I could do that. Of course, I'm going to prime the inside gray, and so this way for the paint to adhere. Since I use acrylics, I have to use a primer. And for the primer, it gives a good neutral base coat, which is actually a good thing when you're building model kits that actually have a different plastic, like say the old Monogram kits, which were green, tan, sometimes white. Revell did the same thing. Some other companies did it for a little while. So I use a gray primer, which keeps everything neutral. I'll explain more about primers down the road. I probably discussed about this before. So I'll be doing that. Once I get that done, I'll be painting these here blanks. They'll be black. Now, this is really a non-issue. I have mentioned in a comparison between the two kits, the AMK and the Kinetic kit. The AMK is not as busy or as involved as the Kinetic kit with the intakes. But to be fair, are you really going to look down the inside of the intakes of this kit? You really can't see much, so you can get away with this. I mean, if you want to, you can always add it, but I'm not gonna. So, and I'm sure they make aftermarket intakes for like a Mirage 3 or 5 or something. So I won't worry about it too much. Now, I forgot. Now I mentioned I had to move this in a little further. This is the reason why I glued the afterburner section in first before installing this. You see how this sticks out? It barely sticks out. That's what you want. You don't want it to be out there clear as day. And so, and to make sure make sure nothing gets interfered here, or it doesn't get oversprayed, I'm going to wrap around masking tape around it. Makes it a lot easier. As for the rest of the kit, everything's going along smoothly, runs along nicely. I'll be priming this course, I'll be doing any final finishing. And the next step is I'll be putting on the vents. Now, the Kfir is not a very smooth aircraft. There's a lot of scoops, vents, you name it, it's got it on there. Partly because of the J79 engine, but also for avionics, keep the airframe cool and whatnot. I mean, that's a lot of air for this aircraft to use. I mean, wow. But you can tell that, and I also noticed with this, it's a lot smaller. Now, I've mentioned it many of times, but I'm still in shock because it's roughly about the size of a Mirage 3, if not a little shorter. I mean, as compared to a F-106 kit, which I got in my stash, that thing's giant compared to this, and it's surprisingly small. It's about roughly the size of an F-16. Matter of fact, I will do a comparison with the Phantom here that I shelved for a little while. You can see how big these aircraft are, and this can carry a lot of stuff. Like I said, I'm building this as a supersonic bomb truck, so slicks are going to be the ordnance, and as for missiles, I'm probably going to be going with Sidewinders. I mean, using Python 3 missiles is a cool thing, but I really don't want to look for the light blue to match it, so I'm going to stick with A9 Sidewinders from that era, which is probably A9D, G, and H, used by the U.S. Navy. As for everything else on it, everything's good. It's just fine. I probably gotta do some modifications here and there, add some blade antennas because I knocked them off while gluing. Unfortunately, like I said, this glue runs a little hot, so it deforms everything. Cause all, and I can't find them, which means I gotta look for them. I will be adding fuel tanks though. So this is it for the moment. For now, I'll be taking a break from this since Christmas weekend is coming up. I got crazy things going on, and I will talk again soon. I will keep you updated on the next task I'll be doing. Oh, and one more thing. Since the ejection seat's not that great, and I really didn't do a great job painting the cockpit. I mean, I did good, but not that good since detail's a little on the soft side for the instrument panel. Everything else is fine. I'll be gluing this with canopy closed. So I'll be discussing that on the next video. I'll be gluing it closed. Nobody's gonna notice a difference. I mean, you can still see everything, but I'm doing this as a static display, not as something for a competition. This is what I got for now, so I will be talking to you again very, very soon. Happy modeling, take it easy, and happy holidays, everybody. Enjoy.